Okay, abusunya bɛma makɔ aba sonko so ɛde POG Media so abusunya yɛmbonwura ɛyɛ yɛnsɛm breaking news bi aba ɛno ɛna yɛ project ɛde ato yɛ screen no ɛnkyɛn de ama mo no Ghana Armed Forces Council withdraws military protections for civilians including public officials and former ministers. Abusunya ɛyɛ resetting agenda no ɛkɔ so former NPP ministers ne nyinaa no ɛyɛ Ghana military forces anaasɛ Ghana military mpanyinfoɔ President Mahama mo a withdraw saa ɔmo militaries a ɔmo wɔ ɔmo fie ɔmo protect ɔmo nyinaa afiri ɔmo nkyɛn abusua breaking news a ɛwɔ hɔ a yɛn nso yɛde ato yɛ screen no nkyɛn ɛde ama mo na Ablekuma North nsɛnsɛm no egu so ɛkɔ so credit goes to TV3 ɔmo aba ɛde nsɛm bi aba abɛto dwa afa mo yɛnkɔ na yɛnkɔ nkɔtie nsɛm nso a ɛkɔɔ so ansa na ɛbɛkɔ no wɔ nsɛm kan bi afa share comment section like na share ma afoforo nso nsa ntumi nka bi aha ɛyɛ POG Media so madam ase
is also in tandem with what Addo raised earlier. They talk about the emasculation of the Ghana Police Service. They say it's a threat to our democracy. I mean, do you support this particular position? And if so, what has to be done to address this?
Definitely there. I have been on the field with the officers of Kufuor for all these years. I think as a nation, we have not come to terms with what we wanted to do and what we need to do and how we want to do it. So it has always been about a knee-jerk reaction. We move from one state to the other, which we put in processes that do not necessarily resolve the critical issues that we face when it comes to our elections and how violent they have become, and in direct relation to the role of politicians and the role of law enforcement agencies and the general population that has a mandate to vote in some of these elections. After, if you take all the violence we have seen in our elections, mostly it's the politicians that create the problem. And they bastardize the process and create all manner of problems. Unfortunately, the blame goes to the security agencies. And people have not asked or people have not really participated when it comes to law enforcement roles and functionalities when it comes to elections. What do they want the police to do and how do they want their actions to be performed? You have police stations that do not support proactive and preventive approach of people getting involved into the inner perimeters. You have coalition centers that are poorly structured, and you have been doing elections since 1992. You are busy going to review the constitution. That will take some level of powers away from the executives and the governance systems of this country in a more transparent manner, in a way that creates flexibility for everybody. But nobody has thought about building new police stations and new coalition centers. And if you have been a law enforcement officer like some of us have been for the past 29 years, you can really see the difficulties we face as law enforcement officers in controlling the basic things we need to do when it comes to elections and how violent politicians have come and how they always want to bastardize the process and blame everybody apart from themselves.
Right.
So to some extent, yeah, I read the grammar, but largely, if you speak to practitioners in the field, you will understand some of the difficulties we face when it comes to dealing with some of these elections and the hiccups we have faced over the years.
I see, and stay with me, Mr. Komado. We can bring in Madam Angela Dwamena Aboagye. She is the Executive Director of the Civic Forum Initiative that is also working in tandem with the Institute for Democratic Governance, IDEC. In fact, Civic Forum Initiative and IDEC jointly issued this statement, which we went through earlier, and she's joined me on Zoom as well. Appreciate you, madam. Thank you for joining us. I mean, you're calling for effective action that needs to be taken urgently. And from where you sit and reviewing the details of this statement you've issued, what effective action can and should be implemented or taken urgently to address this cycle of electoral violence that we've seen almost become a normalized abnormality in our election cycle in this country?
I think beyond effective action is more strategic action. So for, the immediate thing, I would think that the National Security Task Force needs to look at its SOPs again, the way in which they engage with the public when supervising elections like this, or making sure that they are providing the security for elections. I mean, I remember that the former IGP Dampare had a particular approach because he didn't want anybody to die needlessly because of elections, and sort of didn't have his men, the police officers, having guns or anything with them, but just to engage the crowd. But where there are clear vigilante action, you can't just say you want to engage the crowd when they are coming at you forcefully. And that's what we saw. So the first thing is to review their SOPs, the way in which they engage immediately, because Akwatia is coming up, we've all said that. And then more strategically, the nation needs to think about how to implement the Anti-Vigilantism Act, but not only that, to augment security and education in elections in such a way that citizens' action will stop vigilantism, even if it's not without force.
Stay with me, Madam Abaji, and Mr. Kumado, on that point about the electoral cycle and what we have seen over the period, you would agree with this portion of the IDEC statement that the lack or the failure to prosecute the perpetrators, right, of past election-related violence has also fueled the culture of reprisal attacks and, the impunity that we're seeing at the moment, is it not?
Definitely. And Alfred, I have made this point for the past 10, 15 years, me, that, non-punishable of offenses will always rationalize bad behavior and promote antisocial tendencies in society. And that is what we have seen. The politicians don't want to punish their own, and they don't want to prosecute their own. When it comes to elections in this country and you see the role law enforcement officers have played, it's a very simple matter. Today, Dan Pare's name has come out. I remember in the 2024 election, how he was bastardized, that people said he should never send a SWAT team to the field because the politicians will not come to terms with their misbehavior and how the SWAT team is going to deal with them. Then we send the frontliners as a preventive action group to deal with elections and election security in this country. They did their very best, and we did not appreciate the police in that regard. When we are going for election, the police predominantly, or the security agencies predominantly, has a critical role to play in providing security protective cover for both the electorates and the Electoral Commission officers and almost everybody who has something to do with election. The politicians have a responsibility to discharge, and all of us who has a role to play in voting, together with the Electoral Commission, have some functions to undertake. After go back from 1992 or from the year 2000 and look at all the troubles we had with our election. It has always been the politicians who bastardized the process and create a problem for everybody. And yet nobody talks about the politicians, how they get into areas they are not supposed to get into. And they bastardize the place and nobody gets them to answer for anything. And when all these things are done, we come back to the police and say, the police have not acted. Alfred, if the police should come and set up a proactive, preventive structure approach we are talking about, it will make our elections very strict, and people are going to complain and say, why is the police not being friendly? And why is the police preventing people? And why is the police doing this? And why is the police doing that? And that is what I think that, yes, sometimes we stay very far away from the realities on the ground. I was at Abrekuma North, and I was at Ayawaso West Wagon. And my heart breaks when we criticize the police in the manner we do. I understand they make mistakes and they may get certain aspects wrong. But when you have been a practitioner before and you realize that the police does the work and the politicians don't prosecute their own, your heart breaks. And that is where I come in strongly to say that, yeah, it's a shared responsibility. And all of us within the 3 cycle, Papa Police, do your job, or election security, do your job. Politicians, play by the rules and let the voters have a free chance of voting for their preferred candidates. And that is the way we want to go. Other than that, this violence is going to continue for a very long time until politicians come to terms or we start prosecuting them for the offenses they have committed in this country.
Right, and I'm going to come back to you as to whether there's been calls for this election task force to be reviewed. Because this IDEC statement talks about the violence and the incidents that were recorded in the 2019 Ayawaso West Wagon, that's a by-election, the 2020 election. We do know 8 people were reported to have died, in fact, and then in 2024, 6 people died as a result of that election last year. And this is the detail, as we do know. This is it. In the 2020 elections, 8 people. These were the constituencies where the incidents occurred. Ablekuma Central, Odododio, Techiman South, Savelugu, Ewutu Senya East. And then later there were reports of about some 3 persons who died, and that took the death toll to 8. You recall, the NPP NDC supporters clashed in Odododio, 3 lives lost in 2020. Reta Otu Teki, 15 years of age. Boche Taki, 16 years of age. Emmanuel Dompre, 36 years. They died after they were shot in a clash between NPP and NDC supporters in the Odododio constituency. And we understand this, Emmanuel Dompre was an agent of the NDC in that election. There was a 30-year-old activist who died from gunshot wounds in Ablekuma Central shooting incident. Abbas Ibrahim, who was also an NDC activist, shot. And then 2 shot dead by military personnel at Techiman. All of these, and that's 36-year-old Tajuddin Al-Hassan, a trader, 18-year-old Abdallah Yarik, the Savelugu shooting, 2 minors were killed, 14-year-old Samira Zakaria, 15-year-old, who they had nothing to do with the election. Look at their ages. They died as a result of the violence in 2020. That is not the only one. If you look at what happened in 2024, just last year, 6 people who died. The Nyankpala lorry station in Tolong, 1 Haruna Shaibu, 31 years old steel bender, shot and killed. Mukila Ziblim, 35-year-old, died from a gunshot wound. Then this shooting incident at the Utu Senyak East constituency in the central region. The death of 1 person who was also identified as an NDC member as well. I mean, Madam Angela Dwamena, with all of this, to the extent that there's no record of anybody being punished for all this, how's that fueling what we're seeing right now and possibly what could happen, and what has to be done in addressing this violence in terms of identifying the people who did this and punishing them as well?
So, for example, CFI, that's a Civic Forum Initiative, and apart from that, CODEO, alongside with CDD and a number of civil society movements and organizations that are involved in security and peace issues, have consistently called for prosecution of perpetrators of electoral violence and the need to end the impunity. So there's been consistency from 2012, or even 2008, when these things started becoming a problem. There's been consistency in calling for prosecution, investigation and prosecution. And you would notice from the research that for some reason, the law enforcement, that's between the police and the Attorney General, seems to be, there's some helplessness, especially when a new government comes into force, when there's this kind of violence. So the impunity is a problem. And we have to unravel why that is. Okay, is it because the police are wary of the new government? That's why they don't go on to prosecute. Is there a collusion somewhere? Because you won't see any prosecutions for as far back as we can remember. And CDD has done a very a very good research, analysis of the state of prosecutions when it comes to electoral violence since we started having elections. So we need to actually ask the right questions. Why is that so? Is it something that's going on between the police and the attorney general, or it's just the police that is doing this? Why can't they prosecute? Sometimes the people are identified. Sometimes they know who did it. They know where the victims are, okay, who can testify as to who did this. So what is the reason? Is it still about the partisanship that we are talking about? I think it's important for us to, unravel and ask the right questions so we get the right answers.
And that's exactly what we do here. Thank you so much, Angela Dramana Abuaji, she's chairperson of the Civic Forum Initiative. They issued this statement. Now, the former president, John Jacob Kufuor, has broken his silence in what many are describing as a sobering critique of the NPP he once led to historic triumphs in elections gone by. In a rare public reflection, the elderly statesman expressed disappointment over what he perceives as his marginalization within the New Patriotic Party, recalling his political journey from a 30-year-old parliamentary period from 1969 to deputy minister under the Prime Minister Kufuor Bawumia. The former president painted a vivid portrait of personal sacrifice and dedication to Ghana's democratic tradition. Take a look.
And one misses you. And as I'm fancy the brave my sons to the point, sir. I go craft Adrianisha and no cross it, Minidi. Menyan with that stage. And think at least young mammy to be. A matter about compile some young Yamadinams. Niako Dronana, Namanya party maybe. I think I might mature in me. So here, Ghana, political party, political history. I can't say UGCC. But if you 47, 69 was there. Time, nearly power for Ghana. 2 years, 3 months, was there time. Me, 69, my 30 years, and be a member of parliament. Be a founding member of Progress Party. 2 years, 3 months, Buzi, I am a deputy foreign minister. I jump on 2 years. Name sick. The team and number the Ashford prison with them 1 year, 3 months. Something that did their course moved behind another detention. But I know I near the building year. From 72 January, I jump on 2 years side, the tradition. Yeah, more power BOR that till 2001. Me, I'm a crane departing by power. 2 terms. Ghana, didn't see. Anyway, then and there. I bet you say, a young a prepare room. Na bibi se be kona nyame da o ma me to na ya beg no me kura. Me say.
Oh, this is a statement that has generated some reaction to it. The party says there's really no cause for alarm. They're preparing ahead of Saturday. One man who's been looking into the crystal ball on how the reactions will impact on the party, if there are any consequences whatsoever, is going to be joining us tomorrow. That's Professor Samuel Edujemfi. He's a professor of political science at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. He's our guest tomorrow. We'll look into this matter and more here on Ghana Tonight. Make a date tomorrow morning with the New Day team, and also on Sunrise on 3FM 92.7. On behalf of the rest of the team, thank you so much for staying with us. But I wanted to take a look at this. There's a statement that's just come through from the office of the former president, Nana Addo Kufuor. They say the attention of this office has been drawn to 2 separate publications on Otek FM Ghana and Ghana Web, alleging that the former president, Kufuor, sought to overturn the party's decision on early primaries and to postpone the July 19 NPP National Delegates Conference. Go on. Say that for the avoidance of doubt, we wish to state emphatically that these reports are completely false. President Kufuor, who has been out of the jurisdiction for some time now, has not made any such request on the party, either by a petition or any other means, and he does not have any such intentions. Clearly, those behind these publications have an agenda of their own. which has nothing to do with improving the fortunes of the New Patriotic Party, signed office of Nana Addo Akuffo, former president of the Republic of Ghana. Let's find this
I was now winning
statement
and
on
some
Free News.
also our political highway. So militaries personnel such as or more bo NPP former ministers no ba no information a yenya ne say omo and I just say I withdraw some Akuffo na every omo efi ne ade enye asem keto ko be dem asesa mo je pene kokoti sa ensem wi e de mi aha POG Media so me dem ase